publish. There we go. So researchers write and peer review articles as part of their work without additional compensation, right? It's not like someone pitching a novel to a publisher. They're writing articles and publishing them as part of their existing role. Research grants and salaries are often paid, at least in part, with public money, right? Tri-agency funding, government funding, all that kind of stuff. For the last 25 years or so, the internet has emerged as an increasingly important way to share information. And so the internet means that the material costs of publishing are way lower than for print journals, right? It's one thing if we have to actually print and bind and mail 1,000 copies of a journal, but that's not a thing anymore. There are still costs, but they're very different. And from economics, we have this concept called non-rivalrous goods. Online articles are non-rivalrous goods, which is just a useful concept for like why it should be cheaper to do it online. Rivalrous goods are stuff like things in the grocery store, wheat, stuff that comes in boxes. Non-rivalrous goods are stuff like the radio, right? If I listen to the radio, it doesn't use it a lot more than if me and Leah and you guys are all listening to the radio. And so it's a really similar thing for online articles. And the internet means that making and sharing copies of files is extremely inexpensive. It's not nothing, but it is very different than having to print and distribute print journals. So probably this means everything should be free to read and publish, right? Now that we have the internet, you would think that we could cover the cost in some way, but actually it's gotten more expensive, like way more expensive. Somehow we lost this major material cost and the costs have only increased way beyond inflation. So it's actually really expensive to read. The cost of subscriptions is far beyond the cost of publishing, often like $35 to $80 per article, or these really expensive giant subscription bundles that are what the library is dealing with. So like one bundle from Elsevier cost us $1.8 million, which is like 11% of our collections budget. So that's like everything else has to pay for every other book, every other journal, every other resource people want access to. Because that one bundle that people need, because it has important journals in it, is costing us that much money. It's also really expensive to publish in lots of these models. One common model that big publishers really like involves charging authors instead. And so instead of saying, okay, we will charge for a subscription, they say we'll charge you to publish. But this kind of just moves inequity upstream. Instead of you not being able to afford to read it, now you can't afford to publish. We don't even know who's missing out. Nature's a really extreme example, but it does currently cost 17,800 Canadian dollars to publish one article in Nature. This is not like a lifetime publishing fee. This is one article.
Is that like after it gets approved?
Is after it gets approved? Sorry?
Yeah. Do you have to pay after it gets approved, or is that like
you submit, and then in order to be published, you pay this publication fee. So you don't have to pay it to submit it, thankfully. That would be wild, but this is still pretty bad. That is extreme, but a really average one is like $5,000, which is still quite a lot for one article, especially if you think you're getting like a $10,000 or $15,000 grant. Maybe you want to publish more than one article. Maybe you want to pay for actual research, right? So it eats it up pretty fast. And also not all consumers are treated equally, because publishers can treat libraries differently and say, because so many people use your stuff, we're going to charge you way more for the license. And so there's tons of people putting in tons of work to make sure that we can make things still cost tons of money. These sorts of paywalls are more expensive and complicated to maintain than the cost of like actual server and download space. Biggest publishers have really high profit margins on par with like big tech and oil companies. These are not like scholarly nonprofits. And so someone like Elsevier is part of like a larger data analytics company. So like Elsevier's parent company is RELX or Thomson Reuters. And this like includes selling data to ICE surveillance programs. You can read more about that. Sarah Larndon's a legal scholar who's done a bunch of work on this. So just like, we're not talking about scholarly publishers needing to make ends meet. We have a great open access LibGuide that Dee Dawson, our open scholarship librarian, maintains, and also a sustainable scholarship guide if you want to get more into this. But this is just sort of to give you the backdrop. There's a bunch of different kinds of open access. So gold means it's free for everyone to read at the time of publication. So a little bit like what you were talking about, may or may not have costs for the author. Green is authors depositing a copy in the repository, so like Harvest, to make the work available. This is free for the author, but there might be, you have to share a particular version, or you have an embargo period. And then Diamond is free to read when you free to read at the time of publication and free to publish. And there's actually, it started in Canada, the Public Knowledge Project's Open Journal Systems platform that enables Diamond open access with thousands of journals all over the world. And we have a journal hosting program here at USask too. USurge uses this platform. If you've ever encountered the undergraduate journal, that's on this platform as well. Unpaywall is something you should know about just for your own research. It's a browser add-on that you can do, at least Firefox and Chrome for sure. And it will help you find versions of articles that are maybe in a repository or someone's shared on their website or whatever. So this little lock icon on the side, if it's grayed out, they can't find a legal open access version. If it's green or yellow, they can find a version. So that's a handy way. It's not perfect, sometimes it misses stuff, but it is like a useful tool in your toolkit for finding open access things. And it's nice if it's just right there when you find the article. So like this is an example where Unpop Paywall is linking to a version that someone shared in Harvest. So they've shared the accepted manuscript and now someone can read it in Harvest even if they don't have access to the journal itself. Broadly speaking, open access repositories are open infrastructure for sharing research output openly so that more people can read and cite it. It includes metadata to describe the item, so like title, author, subject keywords, so that search tools can index it. And it also makes larger queries possible in tools like OpenAlex or Google Scholar. It's also important for preservation. The files are stored by the repository and made available at a stable link. And there's different kinds. There's disciplinary ones, like Archive has a lot of like physics and math stuff. There's bioarchive, there's all kinds of disciplinary ones. General purpose ones like Zenodo, the folks who run the Large Hadron Collider have like a general purpose repository. And then there's institutional repositories like Hopkins. So this is Archive, which is like based on people sharing like physics articles with each other, like in the early 90s, very early form of open access, and it's still going very strong. This is the Zenodo that I mentioned. And then of course, oh yeah, data repositories. If you are doing stuff with a big data set, a lot of the time it makes more sense to share it in something like the Federated Research Data Repository or similar. If you have like, I don't know, 2 terabytes of data about trees, they have curators who will help make sure that the data is presented in a format that people can actually reuse it, have a license, and then we can link the further thing to like the articles or other research outputs in Harvest. And then of course we have Harvest. So it's USask's institutional repository. A lot of our collections is theses and dissertations. If you ever end up doing a master's or a PhD here, you will have to put it in Harvest at the end of the road. And then also open access journal articles, educational resources, posters, slides, technical reports, brochures, all kinds of things that might not otherwise be captured as well. So it has sort of a few different jobs. And so it's providing increased access to things, including this special kind for journal articles that is free for readers and authors. And it also means there's something we call the open access citation advantage, where generally speaking, things that are shared open access are cited more and also more widely. They're making it to more disciplines as well as just being cited more often. And so there's a few references about this for sharing work in repositories. For journal articles, we didn't study it for posters specifically, which are a little bit more complicated just because they often don't get shared at all. And so the thing with sharing posters is more like making sure that they can be shared and cited at all, but it's still worth knowing all of the same infrastructure that goes into describing things and making them visible also supports the discoverability of posters. We've talked about this already. Yeah, this is a big one for like if you want to share work on personal or research group websites or in your CV or something like that. A lot of the time, various groups on campus will share work, but then they have to maintain it and deal with the storage. And so this is a nice way of handling that. And then if you do get a tri-agency grant, a lot of the time they will require that the work be made open access, and Harvest is one way you can do that. We do have an undergraduate research community. There's several different programs, Surefire, the USSU Symposium, and things like that. And so we've got posters from a lot of those things that check out as well. So just an overview of some of the different kinds of things. I've touched on this a little bit. I'll just go through the slides with the examples. So this is the undergraduate research community, like I mentioned. So if you want to share your Sure poster, it will go in the Sure poster collection there. This is an example. So like Transect is a big like interdisciplinary grant. And so we've shared a bunch of their outputs to sort of help them with their grant reporting process. This is an example of a technical report. We have a lot of like government and researcher collaborations that create these kind of reports that aren't necessarily going to be a journal article, but still need to be shared really widely. So that's something we can do as well. This is one example of an open access, a green open access except journal article. So they've given us this early version, the accepted manuscript. It might look like a Word or LaTeX document. So it's not going to have all the journal branding, and it's sort of like after peer review, but then before this final publisher stage of formatting and copy editing, they're allowed to share that version of the repository. And so that is something that we help with a lot. We have an upload service to help make sure people have the right version of things. And this is like a pediatric oral healthcare brochure made in a few different languages that was part of a very important part of this research project, and this is a way that it can be shared. Again, it's not going to be published in a journal, but it's an important research output, and so it's something that we can share in the repository. And this is an example of in our theses and dissertations collection. This is actually a video dissertation that we have, so you can see the media player there. It is worth noting that things will end up in Harvest, but there's like a whole separate thesis and dissertation submission site so that they do all the like making sure you graduate here. And then it ends up in Harvest sort of long-term as a part of the collection there. So if you are submitting a thesis, you got to go here first. How to share work in Harvest. So we have an upload service now. This is very exciting because it can be very hard to sort out all of the publisher policies. And also it can be really nice for us to reach out to conferences and workshops like this and say, yes, we can help with uploading all of this work and making sure that it's shared. And so that's an option as well, for sure. And so these are some of the concepts. This is some of the stuff you will have to know for your short poster, where we're getting to this sort of stuff, okay? So we're going to talk a little bit about ORCID and other persistent identifiers and like what a persistent identifier is, Creative Commons licensing, the Harvest license, file naming and formats, and then a few things just about sort of student work and permission stuff around that. If you want permission to submit, depending on how individual posters work out, sometimes people get added to add their own posters. Probably we will just do collecting your posters and adding them for you, but this is an option depending on the person. So ORCID, have you heard of ORCID before? Yes, okay, do you have an ORCID? Not yet. Okay, so ORCID is Open Researcher and Contributor ID, and a really important function for it is that it's a unique identifier. So if you have the same name as a bunch of other researchers, or your name changes for whatever reason, or you publish under a bunch of different names, the ORCID is a way of sort of uniting all of this. I think I have an example here. So yeah, lots of different people have the same name. People publish under variations and people change their names, right? So like this is my grandmother. And so we've got a lot of different variations. And then the ORCID means that you can do that. And then she can also control which one shows up. So maybe there's other names associated, but she can say, this is the one I want to show up relative to that. So then that can change over time. And so even if there's some publication that has a different variation, the ORCID can link it back to the controlled current version of the name. And so ORCID is one example. So is the URI you get when depositing in Harvest. DOIs you've maybe heard of are also persistent identifiers. And so if we use these consistently, it lets us search across a lot of different journals and repositories and uniquely identify researchers, their output, and institutions. And we can also include identifiers for things like data sets or code or preprints. And so it's not just any link, it's a special kind of link, and we'll talk about that when it comes to an example for DOIs here. So one thing that a DOI helps us with is like, how do we uniquely identify an article so we can cite it, right? Title and author gets us a lot of the way there, but when we're starting to host things, it's useful to be able to link to them. And a URL does have to be unique, right? It has to go to only one web page. So a URL works okay for a while. And so here we've got a link to this article it's about lentils or something. The screenshot's a little blurry. So right now this link goes to this article, no problem. But maybe the journal stops publishing, or maybe they decide they want to change how their website is structured, or maybe they sell it to some other publisher, right? This is not going to last forever and ever and ever. And so a way to address this is to add this intermediate step. So we have a DOI, and right now we can say the DOI points to frontiersn.org, blah, blah, blah. But if that changes later, we can point the DOI somewhere else. And so if someone has cited this article, we can ensure that the identifier continues to point to wherever the article actually is. And so that intermediate step enables us to make it citable, essentially, in a reliable way. And when we make new DOIs for stuff, we basically say, we promise that we will keep making this point to this resource. If we change our web hosting, that's on us to continue to make sure that this resolves, because we assign this DOI, this unique identifier, and then we also register it with something like Crossref or another registration agency that has all of this information along with it, so the work continues to be findable. Any questions at this point? Okay, online. We're okay. Okay. So Creative Commons licensing is another thing that's very useful anytime you want to share something online. Because copyright is automatic. There's like something called the Berne Convention from Switzerland in like the 19th century. That basically says that once you make it, all rights reserved to you is the default setting. And so Creative Commons is a nonprofit that started in 2001, basically to deal with the impact of the internet on copyright. We talked a little bit before about how sharing stuff is a lot easier and cheaper on the internet than if I have to actually, Xerox your thing or make a publication of it myself. Like reproduction of it is trivial, and so we need different rules basically. And so this allows the copyright holder to specify terms for reuse ahead of time so people can share or reuse the work without having to ask you specifically. So especially for something like a research poster, where the thing that you mostly want people to do is cite it and share it and give you credit for the research. Even the most permissive Creative Commons license requires them to give you credit, which is kind of all you were going to get anyways for the research. And so we think it's a really valuable way of sort of saying ahead of time, yes, please use this work, share this work, as long as you give me credit. If you add it right away at the start of a project, it's easier than if you try to think about it later on, just sort of get into the habit of it. And then if everyone's using them consistently, it makes it a lot easier. We do have a quick start guide as well for just sort of how to do it. And there's a couple tools on the Creative Commons site to help you sort of add metadata and sort of write the license in a consistent way. Yeah, sometimes for research, the thing people care about the most is just being able to read the paper. So you'll see a lot of like journals where the open access articles have this like quite restrictive license, but the main thing is that we want to be able to read it. But if you want people to actually reuse stuff, make a translation, maybe expand it to include local examples or something, it can be useful to give a more permissive license so that they're not worrying. The maybe less useful question is how can I prevent people from stealing my work, because you kind of can't. And maybe the more useful question is, can someone who wants to share or reuse my work and give me credit figure out how to do it, right? If someone wants to steal your work and pretend that it is theirs, there's not a whole lot you can do that's not going to prevent you also from sharing that work, right? If you want to share it so that people can learn about your research, they kind of have to deal with their consequences. But if you want someone to actually share your work and they're trying to do it in good faith, this is a way to help them do that. So this is some examples on the left. It's sort of maybe the most common way this shows up, where it just says the license type and has the associated graphic. But one thing you can do on the Creative Commons site is actually add that metadata in there so that if someone wants to give you attribution, it's really easy to do because you said, I would like you to credit this as Pre-Calculus Mathematics by Lawrence Chang. And so that makes it really easy for you to share how you want them to do that. And that's the Creative Commons resources I mentioned. And then also finding Creative Commons licensed materials to use for images and stuff like that. One thing that people do a lot is have images in their posters that they just kind of like found somewhere, and maybe they slap a URL on it somewhere as like, maybe this means I have permission to reuse it. It doesn't really. And so one useful thing to do is like at the outset, I need a picture of bees for my poster. I'm going to go to Wikimedia Commons and look for pictures of bees. And then they have a place where you can just download the license with attribution. It's very straightforward. You have permission to use it. There's so many pictures on there. And so it's just like a very useful starting point to make sure that you have permission to reuse this work on your poster. There's going to be another presentation in July from Kate Langrell, our copyright coordinator, who will talk more about all this kind of stuff and what you need to know, but it's just sort of a preview for you. I think we talked, licensing for journal articles is a lot more constrained by publisher policy. If you do end up involved in a publication process, a lot of it's just going to be like, how much are you paying for different versions? But if you ever want to check journal policies, this tool is something I use pretty much every day, Open Policy Finder. Don't go to the journal website to find out what their open access policy is, or at least only do it as a last resort. It's so confusing. They all do it differently. And they make you wade through a lot of things because they don't particularly care if you figure out the free way to share your work. Whereas Open Policy Finder just like lays out every journal in a consistent way. And if you're like in this moment of being like, I can't figure this out, please contact us. That's what we're here for. I have a whole team of people to solve this problem of publisher policy. It's super complicated. So don't, if you start sweating, please just reach out. So this is like what it looks like. So you can see like for the published version, this is what you can do depending basically on what you pay. If you pay more money for a more permissive license, The accepted manuscript, they don't have one. This is a gold only journal. And then the submitted version or like a preprint, sometimes this gets called, so it's before peer review, and there's some sort of different policies around that we won't get into today. This is what an accepted manuscript looks like. We've talked about it a little bit. I'm mentioning it now just because it's not something that anybody would like guess. They wouldn't guess that this was a way to make work open access. So this is again after peer review, so the like intellectual content is the same as the final version, but there isn't like the copy editing or branding, that sort of thing. So this one is like plain word processing document. The LaTeX ones are usually prettier because more formatting is baked into LaTeX, but they do still count as accepted manuscripts. And it has undergone peer review, and it's not approved. So we can help you sort this out, but this is sort of what it looks like. And if you're ever using on Paywall and find something that looks like this, odds are good it's an accepted manuscript. The Harvest license is kind of boring, but you should know about it for sharing your poster in Harvest. It's a non-exclusive license. What this means is that in the future, if we change what platform Harvest is on, or we need to migrate to a new format to deal with preservation, this lets us do that. And so it's available on the Harvest page, and it's also integrated into the upload form, but it's just something you should be aware of that you have to agree to as part of sharing your work in Harvest. File naming, we'll just talk briefly about this. When you upload something in Harvest, it just takes whatever file name you have given it. We will correct the most egregious ones. So like, here's some examples. These are some like pretty good file names, right? We've got some names, we've got some title stuff, we've got some date stuff. The middle ones are like pretty bad, right? Article.pdf is like not great. Even on your own desktop, it's not a lot of information. And then the one at the bottom is like with spaces and special characters. Those will mess stuff up. We will fix those if we have to, but also you should just get in the habit. As annoying as it is, special characters are very important for titles and abstracts and all this stuff, but they will unfortunately still break some things. So it's generally better to get out of the habit of using them in file names. We don't have super strict requirements. If you're working on a specific project where you're organizing 10,000 files, I've linked a guide at the bottom about how to do like good file naming conventions if you and your team need those. This isn't that. This is just like if we dropped all the files in Harvest on the floor, could we remotely even possibly figure out? Because someone might download like 6 things from Harvest and just have the file names, right? So we want there to be like something other than like slides.pptx for them to work with. It is okay to have a format other than PDF. The platform will accept most file types. Mostly we're dealing with PDFs for sure posters. If there's something else and you're not sure about it, happy to chat. Some proprietary formats will be harder to access for people who don't have the same software, or will be harder to preserve long-term. Library and Archives Canada has a guide that I refer to that's like, better practices for enduring file format, that kind of a thing. And sometimes we can include 2 types to allow for ease of reading, but also reuse. So like PowerPoint and PDF, or maybe you made like a lesson plan or some kind of guide that you want people to be able to expand, but then I also want someone to be able to read it on a device where they don't have Word installed, for example. But again, when in doubt, get in touch. When in doubt, get in touch. We have lots of folks who can help with this. Undergraduate students do need permission from an instructor or supervisor to upload to Harvest. Usually I've managed this with the SURE people to get that, just because we don't want your very first experience of sharing in an open access repository to have your professor then be like, that data set was under consideration for publication and we can't share it for 6 more months. We don't want you getting in trouble. So it's just worth looping in the supervisors for undergraduates. And it's also worth knowing that like Harvest is a permanent place to share research, right? By assigning these identifiers to it, making it so someone can cite it, we're also kind of saying we're not gonna pull the rug out from under you and take it offline. It does happen in some very narrow circumstances, but it's generally something we avoid. So if you're like, I don't know, this poster's okay, but like, I don't love it, like you don't have to share it. Only share it if you really want to share it, because we can take stuff down if there's like really serious safety concerns or something like that, but generally we will try to redact something before taking it down. And stuff like, I just don't think this poster is that good anymore and I don't want it online isn't like a high enough bar, right? If you're sharing research, it's been shared, people are going to cite it, people are going to build on it, and so we have a responsibility to keep it available essentially. So that is something to keep in mind. We want you to share your work, but you should know that it's making it available and that we have that sort of responsibility to the readers as well. So this is just a really quick look at the deposit process, which you probably won't actually ever need to do, but it'll give you just sort of some sense of what things look like on my end, basically. So we have all these different collections. We add the file, The author names, this is where if you have an ORCID, we will do an ORCID lookup. So it will associate with your ORCID on that end of things, which is nice. If you don't, we can still deposit it, but this is like a good opportunity to just get one now. It does solve a lot of problems in terms of being able to identify researchers. And also if you switch institutions as well. I mentioned changing names, but changing institutions is an important one too, because your ORCID can move with you even if you do a degree at another institution or get a job somewhere else, all that kind of stuff. We can also link identifiers. So like if you have a data set somewhere and you want to include it, you've gathered all your tree data, and then you also have your tree report. We can put the tree report in Harvest and link that DOI that Further gives you so that people who are reading the report know where the data is. Or maybe you had a software. We can mint a DOI for the software and include the DOI for the software so that all those outputs are linked together and people can sort of figure out where you were coming from, what you were doing, that kind of thing. This is mostly going to be posters, so that's not super. And then if there is funding for this, it is worth including this information on your poster. We'll find it on your poster, but it is something that funders like to know where the money ends up being spent, so we do try to keep track of that metadata. And then you can also pick a Creative Commons license as part of the deposit process. This is the Harvest license that I mentioned before. And then that is, I mentioned this before, this is the link that you'll want to use. So URI is Uniform Resource Identifier. Handle.net, it's sort of similar to the DOI, except it doesn't have, DOI record has like this identifier and then also metadata about the item, whereas the handle is just the link to the item, but it still does a lot of the same stuff in terms of being a stable link and being registered with a third party, in this case, handle.net. And so once you share your poster, this is the link you're going to want to use on your CV, on your website, when sharing with friends. Because this is the link that you'd want to use like in a citation and that we are promising to make last forever, essentially. The link, if you just copy the browser URL, it'll probably last for a long time. It's not like we change how this is hosted on a weekly basis. That would be very bad. But this is the one that we've sort of said we are going to maintain this link into the future. Again, only relevant for articles, but if there is an embargo period, actually, if you have a poster that like is related to work that is currently under publication, this might apply to your poster too. But you don't need to wait. We can deposit it immediately and set the embargo period within Harvest. And there's actually even a request form. Sometimes during an embargo period, it can still share it individually, depending on the reason for the embargo. And so you don't have to wait until that time to then remember to share it. You can share it right away and we can set an embargo period. So that's the overview. I think there's a lot, but feel free if you have questions, and thanks for your time. And I have Harvest stickers. Please get a Harvest sticker. So. Did we get it? Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Any questions? Yes.
What's the purpose of an embargo period?
Yeah, so two main things. The first one is like if I have a journal article and I'm sharing the accepted manuscript because I can't afford or don't want to pay the APC. Sometimes the journal will say, that's fine, but we want to be the only place people are looking for the first 6 months, 12 months, whatever. So that's one where we have an embargo period so that you have to wait if you want this version. The second one is that sometimes people will. This happens most commonly when someone's sharing like a thesis where they're also trying to publish a journal article based on it, but it comes up for posters sometimes too, where it's like the poster is related to research that is being considered for publication. And a lot of the time people will say, can we just have it embargoed until the publication process is sorted out? Because journals will do like plagiarism checks or things like that. And sometimes if there's similar content, it will pop up, even if it's not technically in violation of the journal policy. This is like the annoying part, because it is very common for people to publish work based on a thesis or based on related research or whatever, but sometimes it's easier to embargo it than it is to have to fight someone being like automated rejection. So it's unfortunate because it means that related work is not getting shared when it technically could be according to their policies, but it is one of the ways that that pops up as well. Good question. Thank you. Thanks, Ben. Mm-hmm. We can be done if there's no other questions. So And I don't know if there's a way to share slides with folks, but there's lots of links to stuff if people want to further later. Here. Stickers. Make sure the people who came in first get stickers. Okay, there's like a few different kinds. There's like a dog and a ghost. And there's a cat in here somewhere. Okay. Cat. There's open access generally and then harvest specific stickers. So get yourselves to a sticker. Ruby, do you need a new harvest sticker? No, we can't. Sticker? Yeah, it was dog. It was dog. Okay, here. There you go. Thanks for coming, everybody. Want a sticker? So, sure. There's a cat, a dog, a ghost, and then I like that little. Let's make a dog. It's a dog. It's right. Everyone. Sorry, I still. I was there.
Why the pig, I'm just going to the family.
Only bring one dog. Okay, so this cat, a ghost, or a tractor. I'm sorry. Do it.
That's what you want.
Getting the plans. Okay.
How do we make it more?
How do you make an orchid? Great question. It's the orchid set here. I can show you. So if you go to orchid.org.
Is it free?
It is free, yes. I should have said that in the presentation. It is free and it's very, very fast to set up. Basically, you just go to sign in or register, and then it's like your name and your email address and your institution. You can add publications to it, but you don't have to. There's basically Orchid eventually is working to like connect all of the institutions and the publishers so that there can be a lot more automated, like, because you published, the publisher will push your publication record to your Orchid and stuff like that. And it's like only set up in some places so far. But that is sort of like the grand dream for it. So right now people are adding a lot of stuff manually. This is me. And so there's my name and my orchid and some affiliations and some previous affiliations and publications and all that kind of stuff. And so that's how it looks. You can fill it out more or less as you desire, but this is sort of the important bit that's going to be associated. And you'll notice if you look for it on like journal articles, you'll see these little green ID things that link back to that. So you can check that out. But yes, it is free and it is very fast, and they do not, it's not like you have to apply, you just get one. So you could be done in 5 minutes kind of a thing. But yeah, good question. Thanks for asking.